Good day, and welcome to the first in what might become a series called Ozone. I've decided to do a major relaunch of my, I suppose, video channel, for want of a better term, because the other day I went through and had a look at some of the videos that I'd made a while back on building a turnout in O-scale. And at the time it had been my intention to make some other videos as well and post them on YouTube. And for a range of reasons, after watching those videos, it became very apparent that I'd sort of stopped making videos to me. And I hadn't been aware of how long I'd stopped, but the first video in that series starts with me saying, "Welcome to the first day of 2018. So this is my, I suppose, relaunch of an attempt to make a few videos of relevance to train models in general, but also to especially focusing on O-scale modelling. Why O-scale? Because I model in O, and because there seems to me to be a real dearth or limited number of videos focusing on content directed specifically at two-rail, fine-scale, O-scale modelers. And that's the sort of modelling that I consider myself to be. I'm a fine-scale modeller, or at least a scale modeller. And a lot of the stuff around on places like YouTube is great. It's directed at modelers in general, but I find there's a lot of issues that don't get covered, and when I go looking for something on YouTube and I can't find it, I think somebody should make a video on that. And to a very large extent, this series of videos, which I'm calling Ozone, is going to be about things that I think I'd like to know a bit more about. So if I want to know about them, it's quite possible others out there do too. I'm going to try and make sure that all the videos are in one place, clearly labelled and searchable so that you can find them. But I thought I'd start with just a quick introduction. I have no particular format or plans in mind, but I thought I'd let you know that I've bought myself a new camera, which is the first bit of, and this is the first bit of footage that I've taken with this camera. My previous camera was probably 10 years old when I started using it a couple of years ago, and the one big disadvantage it had was that I couldn't see myself on the screen because it didn't have a swivel sort of screen. This one does, and I'm hoping that will make it a lot more convenient, a lot easier for me to make the videos. I've also bought myself some new editing software, and I've also got myself back onto my YouTube channels. I discovered just recently that all the videos that I'd uploaded onto YouTube about making the turnouts, that I had no longer had access to them because I'd changed computers and I no longer had the login details, so I couldn't get onto the YouTube in that section. So I'm going to go back to an older channel and relaunch that. If I can, I'm going to rename it and call it Ozone, and try to aim to make a semi-regular set of videos. I hope to make them relevant to people who are not just modelling the same prototype that I model. There'll be a lot of track laying and electronics in the next couple of videos because that's what I'm doing at the moment. Hopefully no turnout building. I've also bought myself some camera mounts, which haven't arrived in the mail yet, that will allow me to put the camera directly over the top of my workbench, allowing you to see what I'm doing in detail and hopefully well lit and clear. So with a new camera and a new way of mounting the camera above the workbench, I'm really hoping that you'll get a better view of what I'm doing. And I'm also going to make the undertaking to interact with people if they post comments. So if you post a comment on the channel, I'll try and make sure I look at them and respond. Other than that, I'd just say welcome. I'll spend a little bit more time in this video. I'll take a bit of footage over the next few days, and I'll try a few techniques such as voiceovers, maybe speeding some of the camera work up without me talking, and showing you what I'm doing right at the moment and on the layout, and hopefully you'll find that interesting. I'll try and keep this video nice and short so that you don't have to invest a lot of your time in watching it. But other than that, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. What you can see in the camera view at the moment is what I'm loosely describing as the Hunter River siding. A couple of things came together to allow me to lay this track that you can see in front of you. Not all of it is laid. I make my track on these pieces of 4mm ply, and at the moment these bits here, this bit here, this bit here, they're not actually permanently laid. But that's the next job. All this up here is in place and laid, but that's as far as it's got. It hasn't yet got any wiring done to it, and it hasn't yet had a train on it. On the right hand side here, where you may be able to see my hand, there will be a rather large dairy running along here. On the left hand side, down this track here, you can't really see much of it from here, but there will be probably a mill building I'm going to build further down. The reason I'm showing this is because this is the bench work that I talked about on my blog a few months ago about turning into a narrow gauge branch. For me, as I developed the plan, tried to implement using narrow gauge track and tried to get things to fit, it just wasn't working for me. Okay, here we are down at the other end of the line, and what you can see in this bit of track here is the Hunter River siding coming down and crossing the main line, which is this piece of track here. Now recently I posted some photos of this crossing on Facebook, and I don't think I've really written much about it on the blog or other areas because it was always a bit of a test. I've never made a piece of track like this, and I've never wired one up. I've never needed to before. But if I wanted to get this industrial siding done, what I needed to do was make a grade crossing, and this is it. Now at this stage, it's still pretty much a test, even though I've got a little track laid further beyond that, beyond the crossing. I haven't actually run a locomotive through this yet, and part of the reason for that is because it hasn't got any check rails inside the diamond there. I was quite pleased with the way this piece of track came out. I was a bit hesitant to believe that I could actually do it, but it has led to one problem, and that is these risers here leading to the what I've always referred to as the coal branch are now no longer high enough to allow the trains to pass across there. Now what I've got to do is I've got to raise this the same amount as I've cut a piece of wood, which is a height block, as this piece of wood. So the underknot side of that track there has to clear that space, and this bit of riser here is about 2 centimetres, maybe about 1 inch too low. So I'm going to have to raise the grade on this branch, the coal branch, not this branch. So there's actually 2 branch lines sort of crossing each other, and I'm a little bit worried that it might limit the trains I can run, but we'll test it all out and go for it. Now, why I'm showing you this is because everything I'm doing at the moment, which I'll be videotaping and hopefully demonstrating to you, is all related to this crossing and the height of this underside of this track. If I can get this to work and I can get this laid in and allow trains to run up this piece of track that's going to cross this way, then I'll be able to wire it all up and get it incorporated into the main layout. If I can't get these things to work together, I'm going to have to do a major rethink. Okay, in watching those videos that I made of the turnout building previously, it suddenly became apparent to me that I hadn't really talked about plain track very much. Talked a lot about turnouts and points, frogs and things like that, but not plain track. And you don't get much plainer than this. It's a piece of track that's about probably 200mm long, about 8 inches. I decided to use Code 83 rail because I bought a pack of micro-engineering Code 83 rail to make some narrow gauge turnouts and track, and because I wasn't using that to make narrow gauge track, I decided that I had it available. I'd see whether or not I could run my standard gauge trains on the track. Turns out that the wheels on the standard gauge trains work fine on Code 83 rail, and it's a dream to work with because it's so light. It's very easy to file and shape. Now, as I said, my usual practice to make track is to make a base 62mm wide, the bases, and just a length. If I need to curve it, it obviously changes, but it still remains at 62mm wide, which gives me a little bit of an overhang on each side of the sleepers. I put a centre line down the centre of the track, and I use that centre line to gauge the track where the rail should be. I've also drawn a centre line, I'm not sure you can see that, but I've also drawn a centre line on the baseboard where the track's going to be laid, and I line that up with the centre lines on the track. Now, in addition to Code 83 rail, I had about 10 pieces of Code 70 rail that were left over from my HO days in the 1990s, and I decided to lay a little bit of track in Code 70. And so far, that's this track here, it's beautifully fine and looks like very light, say code, I would guess, about 40-pound rail. So as I said before, this entire siding really is a bit of a test run for a whole range of things. One of them being making that crossing that I showed you earlier, but also in the way I make track and the materials I use to make the track. These 4 bits of track, there, and there, show the types of rail I'm using on the layout now. Up until recently, pretty much standardised on Code 125, which is this sort of rail here. Same sleepers, same base, 62mm wide. This is Code 125 rail, all micro-engineering and pinned down with small spikes. On some of the sidings I decided I'd use Code 100 rail, so I had a pack of Code 100 rail and I was using that. That is Code 100 rail there. But because I had the rail left over from the narrow gauge track that I wasn't going to be laying on this particular siding, I decided to lay the track on this siding using Code 83 rail. That's the Code 83 rail there. And because I had about 10 pieces of rail left over from my early HO days, at Code 70, these rails here are Code 70. Now again, I'm not sure it's apparent in the video that you can actually see the different size of these rails, but on light industrial sidings, I like the idea of using this lighter rail. It's very easy to work with. The only downside to it is that because I make my own turnouts, I needed to buy some different jigs from Fast Tracks in Canada, and those have arrived over the last couple of weeks in waves, and I've been making turnouts in Code 83 as well. So another change or difference is that these turnouts here are Code 83 rail, but they are also number 5 turnouts, so the frogs in them are number 5s. So they are about 4 inches, 100mm shorter than the Code 6, the number 6 turnouts that I demonstrated in those videos. So this is another big change. It saves about 100mm per turnout, but it also, if you multiply that by the fact that it has 1, 2, 3, 4 turnouts here, I've saved a foot in space. And when you get to the end of a head shunt and you want to be able to run around a train, that 300mm is an important saving. So the next bit of track is this piece here. It curves down to the turnout at this end. I might have a little bit of adjustment to do, but generally speaking, it should slot straight in there. I'm just testing the backdrop of the section of benchwork I've been working on, and this piece of backdrop, there's the white sheet you can see behind this building front. The building front is not really a kit, it's a set of parts that were laser cut for me by Glenn Scott at Model O Kits, which I'm going to use in this section of the layout. It's not in its correct position, it'll be a bit further to the left of where you can see now. And I'm just testing whether or not I'm happy with the clearance above the building of the backdrop. And looking at it right now, you're looking at it sort of at my level, or eye level, which is where I'm sitting at the moment. And there's probably about 60 millimeters above the peak of the roof there. The backdrop sits above that, and I do have quite a bit of clearance above there. There's nothing restricting the height of the backdrop. So this backdrop was pre-cut quite a while ago, and I painted it white. Before I painted blue and put it in its final colour, I just wanted to test whether I was happy with its height, and I'm actually not. So I'm thinking of changing that to a higher, make it slightly higher. Originally I'd planned to put the backdrop down here. The bottom of it would be along this edge here, but because it's a little lower, this piece of benchwork here is a bit higher. The baseboard is a bit higher than I'd originally planned. I was able to get it a bit higher in its current location than when I'd originally planned this as a narrow gauge line. I cut the backdrops to match the height of the benchwork being about there, where my finger is, at the tip of my finger. It's now a good 2 inches, 60 millimeters higher. So instead of screwing it into the back of this part of the benchwork here, I've just put some cleats, these little cleats in, just a bit of 15 mil, 16 mil plywood, and I'm going to put the backdrop in like that and screw it in from the back here. And that will give me the clearance I need between the back of this is the front of the backdrop. The building will sit, this thing will sit somewhere about here. This is back on the track side of the backdrop. Again, being white, it's not clear it's a backdrop, but it will eventually be the same blue as that blue you can see on the right hand side there. You can see how much extra space is above the building now that I've raised the width of the piece of timber at the bottom, which is about 60 millimeters. And because of the slope ceilings, my backdrops are all fairly low. And while I'd love to have backdrops that completely mask the rest of the room, I have to live with what I've got. And a backdrop that gives me about 100 millimeters between the peak of that roof and the top of the backdrop is about as good as I'm going to get. In this section I could have raised it higher, but it would have stuck out compared to all the other backdrops. The operating well won't have that chair in it, but the operating well for this part of the layout is obviously where the chair is, standing in this aisle. This aisle is around about 850 millimeters wide. It's not as wide as I'd like, but eventually that bump out that you can see there will be gone. The whole corner section, all the backdrop that's drooping down at the moment, all that corner, this track work will all be relaid in slightly different configuration. I'm going to give the yard here 3 lines where it's only got 2 at the moment. This side of the aisle, I debated for a long while with myself about whether to put the backdrop on this side or that side, because I can do it either way. But the clearance on this side of the aisle, over here, is a lot less than here. So while 2 people can just about reasonably comfortably get past, it doesn't give you generous passing. The aisle, as you can see, is a triangular shape on the other side. It widens out. There will already be possibly 2 people operating in that well. So I decided that it would be better to have the control, I suppose the controls and the operating side for this part of the line, this bit here, on this side. So it will remove people from that aisle and bring them over into this aisle. Now at the moment, the track's just about complete. I've got a couple more pieces, this siding here running from where this ruler is. There's a siding running along here, and then it goes to around about where that blue tape is there, and it runs down to the end. This piece of what looks like benchwork here, this piece of timber here,
is the mill building. These are the CAD drawings of the mill building. That's the piece of the building that I showed you before. That's the piece that sits there. But the overall building itself, I don't know whether it's in this part or not. These aren't instructions so much, they're just a printout of the CAD drawings that the machine used to cut this up. That's the entire building there. So if you can imagine that will be sitting along here. And the reason it's on its own separate base is because I can take it inside, even though it will be fairly inconvenient to work on. I can take it inside and I can build it separately, and then I can bring it back, test it out. At that point, I then have to decide whether this turnout's going to come into here. Now, the reason for the turnout being here is because I'm almost convinced that there's no way of shunting these sidings conveniently without leaving your train back in Queen's Wharf, which is a good 12-15 metres away. As soon as you start putting them in these loops, it ties up the loop, you can no longer run around the train. So the thinking behind this is that I need to make one more turnout. It will go in here, run siding back to here, and a train would come down, park the train on the line, then come in, pick up the various wagons from the two locations, put them on this piece of track here, that isn't here yet obviously, and then bring its train in, deposit its incoming wagons in various locations. It would then pick up these outgoing wagons and then go out. Now, having said that, I don't really wish to make another turnout if I can avoid it, but the more I think about it, the more I develop this plan, the more I realise that it's likely I'm up to building another turnout.